Section 4. Reconstruction of the CIA Mexico City Station and Headquarters actions prior to the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. A. Introduction. CIA interest in and liaison with FBI regarding American citizens in contact with Soviet bloc embassies in Mexico City. The Central Intelligence Agency has claimed that no investigation of Oswald was made in Mexico prior to the assassination of President Kennedy. For this reason, the agency claimed the fact that Oswald was seeking a visa and that he had also been to the Cuban embassy was not discovered until after the assassination. Quote, "It was not until 22nd of November 1963 when the station initiated a review of all transcripts of telephone calls to the Soviet embassy that the station learned that Oswald's call to the Soviet embassy on 1st of October 1963 was in connection with his request for a visa to the USSR. Because he wanted to travel to the USSR by way of Cuba, Oswald had also visited the Cuban embassy in an attempt to obtain a visa allowing him to transit Cuba. Inasmuch as Oswald was not an investigative responsibility of the CIA, and because the agency had not received an official request from those agencies having investigative responsibility requesting the agency to obtain further information, station did nothing other than ask headquarters on 15th of October for a photograph of Oswald." End quote. Neither of the above assertions is accurate. An analysis of the information available will show that the first assertion of the above quote, that the station did not learn of Oswald's contact with the Cuban consulate and the fact that he was seeking a visa until after the assassination, is incorrect. CIA's IG report inaccurately implies that no action would have been taken by the Mexico City station with respect to an American in contact with the Soviet embassy in Mexico other than merely reporting the contact, unless the station had received a specific request from an interested U.S. government agency. The IGR's implication is inaccurate because, as will become apparent in the following discussion, the CIA had an understanding with the FBI regarding this class of cases and often did more than just report without any specific interest being expressed by any other agency of the United States government. In fact, the station often monitored and mounted operations against Americans in contact with bloc embassies. At a minimum, they attempted to collect as much information as possible on Americans in contact with the embassies. This was routine. It was also the case with Lee Harvey Oswald. B. Narrative of Mexico City Station actions prior to the assassination. On 27th of September 1963, Sylvia Duran contacted the Soviet consulate on behalf of Lee Harvey Oswald. Later that same day, the Soviet consulate returned Miss Duran's call. Under normal procedures, these transcripts would have been in the CIA station by the 1st of October, and Miss Goodpasture brought these transcripts into the station on that morning and put them on redacted desk. Redacted recognized the transcripts as containing information of a possible counter-espionage or counterintelligence interest and routed them to Mr. Shaw, Miss Goodpasture, and Wynne Scott, in reverse order. Mr. Scott wrote at the top of the September 27th 426 call, "Is it possible to identify?" This was the first interest in Oswald recorded by the Mexico station, even though the caller was as yet unidentified. It indicates a routine interest in an American who is in contact with the Soviet embassy. After the transcripts were routed, they were filed in a general subject file. The September 28th call was probably received at the CIA station on Monday, 30th of September 1963. The routing and filing instructions indicate that it was handled in much the same way as the September 27th conversations. On 1st of October 1963, a conversation in which an English-speaking person identified himself to the Soviet consulate as Lee Oswald came to the attention of a monitor in the electronic surveillance base house. The monitor immediately notified the American technician, who then listened to the tape. The technician had instructions, quote, to alert the station immediately if a U.S. citizen or English-speaking person tries to contact any of the target installations." End quote. The technician called Ann Goodpasture, and a meeting was arranged. The technician marked the tape urgent, specifying where the conversation occurred on the reel, put it in a box, and delivered it to Miss Goodpasture within 15 minutes of the telephone call to Miss Goodpasture. The tape was delivered to Boris Tarasov, who transcribed it and returned it to the station on that same day. As soon as the station learned that an American had contacted the Soviet embassy, Miss Goodpasture began to screen the photographs from the Soviet surveillance operations. The photographs from the coverage of the Soviet embassy, however, were not delivered as promptly as the transcripts. The photographs from October 1st, 1963, were not removed from the camera until the 3rd or 4th of October. Hence, they would not have been received until 4th, Friday, or 7th, Monday, October, by the station. A cable reporting Lee Oswald's contact with the Soviet embassy was written and sent to headquarters by Redacted on October 8, 1963. Various reasons have been advanced to explain the 7-day delay in sending this cable. David Phillips explained the delay by saying that Redacted was too busy to be bothered by something of such a routine nature. Quote, "Redacted was a busy man, sometimes procrastinating. His wife was working for him, and on 1 or 2 occasions I spoke to Redacted, kiddingly saying, 'Hey, where's the cable about this fellow?' or something like that, or maybe to his wife. I'm not sure. In any event, what happened, a few days passed, and Redacted prepared a message. She was working for her husband, and as I recall it, she typed it herself, but I am not positive on that point. But in any event, she prepared the cable and took it to Redacted, at which time he signed off on it. During that process, it did come to me, also to sign off, because it spoke about Cuban matters, and then went to the chief of station and was released." End quote. A blind CIA memorandum entitled "Delay in Sending the First Cable About Oswald" was located in a soft file on the unidentified man photograph. This memorandum asserts that Dave Phillips, quote, "didn't know what he was talking about," end quote. The memorandum's assertion is correct. Redacted did not sign off on the cable reporting Oswald's contact with the Soviet embassy. Mr. Phillips did not sign off on that cable. The cable did not mention anything about the Cuban consulate or Oswald's contact with it. Mr. Phillips never discussed the cable with the Redacted. In fact, Mr. Phillips was on a temporary duty assignment in Washington, D.C. and Miami, Florida from at least late September to October 9, 1963. The blind memorandum referred to above regarding the delay offers another explanation for the 7-day lapse before sending the cable. After explaining that the photo production would not have arrived at the station until Monday, 7th of October, the memorandum says, quote, "A name trace could have been requested on the basis of the name alone, but that wasn't the way Win Scott ran that station. He wanted the photographic coverage tied in with the telephone coverage. Sometimes there was a U.S. automobile license number. It was also part of the numbers game of justifying a project by the number of dispatches, cables, or reports produced." End quote. In all likelihood, the delay in sending this initial cable was due to a combination of factors. Redacted testified that, in fact, he was not too concerned with the task and left it to his wife. Quote, "The only action I took was the action my wife took, was to send the cable to Washington summarizing the information we had on Oswald and his contact with the embassy. We also asked our headquarters for a trace of an American. That was routine." End quote. The delay could also have been partially due to the wait for the photo production. Miss Goodpasture did check the photographs and did add a paragraph to the cable concerning a photograph. Another reason that the cable was delayed was that there was some question within the station about who had the responsibility to report Oswald's contact with the Soviet embassy. Quote, question, "What action did you take after seeing this transcript?" From the October 1 conversation. Answer, I think I was the third or beyond person who saw it. It was brought to my attention by the chief, the head of the Soviet section, and by Ann Goodpasture, who was discussing this and who was going to notify headquarters and whose responsibility it was. As I recall, I was told to write it up. Question: why was there discussion about whose responsibility it was? Answer: I think because when it was an American, it sort of fell between whether we should have to do it, whether it was our responsibility to send this up because it had to be accompanied by a memo and it took time, or whether it was Ann's responsibility. It was just a little, not argument, but a discussion about, well, you do it, I don't want to do it, you handle it, and I had to do it. End quote. The reason that the responsibility would have lain with the Soviet section is obviously because the American was in contact with the Soviet embassy. Miss Goodpasture also had a potential basis for responsibility because she was responsible for liaison functions with the legal attaché, Army, Navy, and Air Force on routine counterespionage cases. She also assisted the Chief of Station and Deputy Chief of Station on these cases as they occurred. The primary reason for the delay was most likely a combination of the responsibility dispute and the routine nature of the case as perceived by the CIA officers at that time. Quote, Ann Goodpasture probably came in. It was really a matter of here is another one of those things again, and we were having a little gabble about who would send it up because it was a pain to do these. I think I handled it as soon as I got it, but I think there was a discussion, as I say, maybe a half a day, about who was going to do it. It was done because it was required, but it was considered unimportant. End quote. Footnote. Deposition of Redacted, April 28, 1978, page 65. Foul Foe manuscript, page 268, where Wynne Scott writes, quote, In fact, Lee Harvey Oswald became a person of great interest to us during this 27th of September to 2nd of October 1963 period, end quote, and on page 269 where he writes, quote, because we thought at first that Lee Harvey Oswald might be a dangerous potential defector from the USA to the Soviet Union, he was of great interest to us, so we kept a special watch on him and his activities, end quote, end footnote. Important or significant information was usually sent to headquarters by cable as opposed to the slower dispatch which was sent to headquarters by diplomatic courier. Quote, cables were sent if the information was of such a nature that it had to be acted on within a day or a day and a half or 2 days. Dispatches took so long that you really could not take any kind of operational action predicated on dispatch. End quote. Redacted, the chief of the Soviet section in Mexico City, recalled that the criterion for a cable, as opposed to a dispatch, was the perishability of the information being transmitted. Quote, the normal criterion would be the urgency attached to that information, the perishability of the information, not its importance necessarily. The perishability was the criterion. If it was something that concerned an event that was going to happen in the 2 or 3 days, you did not want to use a medium which was going to take a week to get to Washington. End quote. Hence, it is possible that Oswald's contact was reported by cable because it was considered significant by the Mexico station, but this interpretation is not supported by the weight of the testimony. 2 other criteria for reporting by cable were pointed out: information concerning Soviets, Cubans, and Americans. Generally, quote, everything Soviet was of high priority. Cuban operations, a lot of cables were sent. End quote. And in the case of Oswald, quote, in this specific case, a cable was used to send this information to headquarters only because it concerned an American, not because it concerned a matter that was considered to be of importance. End quote. The testimony of former CIA Mexico City officers consistently supports the position that Oswald's initial contact with the Soviet embassy was considered fairly routine. The testimony indicates that the routine procedure of the station was to report such a contact by cable, whether it was considered routine or not. The station had instructions to report Americans in contact with the bloc embassies to headquarters because it was of interest to the FBI. The following quotes illustrate these points. Alan White said, quote, Question. Was Oswald's contact at the embassies in Mexico considered to be important? Answer. At the time it first occurred? Question. Yes. Answer. I would have to conclude that it wasn't recognized as anything extraordinary at the time it first occurred. Question. Why do you conclude that? Answer. Because had it been, it would have been pulled out and sent to Washington either with a complete transcription, a complete excerpt out of the transcription, or the entire tape and transcript would have been sent to Washington by the first available pouch, probably by special courier. Question. Does the fact that Mexico City Station sent to headquarters a cable reporting Oswald's contact suggest that the station considered the contact to be important? Answer. You are asking what is the significance of the cable? Question. Yes. Answer. Well, operational, that is all. Here is an American citizen, at least a man who appeared to be an American citizen, speaking broken Russian and in contact with the embassy. This is of operational interest. This is the kind of information that we were directed, among others, to get back to Washington because they passed that kind of thing to the Bureau. Question. Were contacts by Americans with the Soviet embassy considered to be unusual? Answer. Well, we were 1963 then. They were considered worthy of note, let me put it that way. Of course, from an operational point of view, we were looking for any way we could exploit a contact with the Soviet embassy. Question. Were such contacts by Americans frequent? Answer. Not terribly frequent. Not terribly frequent. There were members of the exile colony in Mexico City who were in kind of routine contact with the Soviets, usually on cultural matters. No, I would say they were relatively infrequent. That is why... Question. The cable was sent? Answer. Yes. End quote. The chief of the Soviet section testified on this point also. Quote, Was this particular contact considered to be unusual or routine? Answer. Routine. Question. Why is that? Answer. During the summer period, particularly, or toward the end of the summer period, a relatively large number of Americans, for various reasons, made contact with the Soviet embassy. This appeared to me, when I had the information reported, to be just another case of an American contacting the embassy for no significant reasons. Question. In each case that an American contacted the embassy, would a cable be sent to Washington? Answer. Yes, indeed. End quote. Redacted, the person who actually handled the reporting also considered the case to be routine. Quote, Question. Was the Oswald contact with the Soviet embassy considered to be unusual? Answer. No. Question. Why not? Answer. Well, there were cases of other Americans who contacted the embassy for various reasons. We were only obliged to report the contact of any American with the Soviet embassy. Question. So in Oswald's case, it was just a routine contact by an American as far as you were concerned? Answer. Yes. Question. If that is the case, then why was the cable sent concerning Oswald? Answer. That is why I asked you earlier, because in the case of Americans, we were required to send it by cable and not by dispatch. Question. Was that a written regulation? Answer. I don't know if it was written, but it was understood at our station that any Americans who were in touch with the Soviet embassy, that fact had to be known to headquarters by cable. It was always sent that way, whether we considered it very unimportant or routine or not. So there must have been a regulation, but I am not aware of it. End quote. Footnote. HSCA deposition of Redacted, April 28, 1978, pages 51 and 52. The HSCA has requested a copy of any internal regulations or any liaison agreement with the Federal Bureau of Investigations that may have been in existence in 1963. Letter to Breckinridge, July 20, 1978. The CIA responded, quote, that there are not now, nor were there any agreements between the CIA and FBI or other U.S. government agencies concerning CIA responsibility to report on contacts of U.S. citizens with communist embassies or officials. The CIA, under operative legislation, has a counterintelligence responsibility for counterintelligence cases, but it is not a matter of agreement with other agencies, nor does it concern simple contacts of Americans abroad with communist embassies or officials." End quote. Memorandum to Breckinridge from Shepanek, July 31, 1978. End footnote. The reader should be reminded here that the only conversation that had been linked to Oswald at that point in time was the one that occurred on 1st of October. The other transcripts had passed over the redacted and Goodpasture's desk, but had not been linked to Oswald because his name was not mentioned in them. Redacted did not recheck the earlier transcripts, but did check the station's index system to see if it had any record of a Lee Oswald, which it did not. Quote, question. Here it says in brackets, comment by the translator, the same who phoned a day or so ago and spoke in broken Russian. Answer, right. Question. Despite this indication here, I believe your testimony is that you did not go back to check the transcript because by virtue of your memory, you knew that Oswald's name had not come up in any earlier conversation. Is that correct? Answer, yes. End quote. So, Redacted drafted the first paragraph of the October 8th cable on the basis of the October 1st, 1045 conversation alone, even though the other information was available. That paragraph of the cable provided an accurate summary of the intercepted conversation. It said, quote, ACC Soviet wiretap, 1st of October 1963. American male who spoke broken Russian said his name, Lee Oswald, phonetic, stated he at Sovem on 28th September when spoke with consul, whom he believed to be Valery Vladimirovich Kostakov. Subject asked Soviet guard Ivan Obyedkov, who answered, if there is anything new, re-telegram to Washington. Obyedkov, upon checking, said nothing received yet, but request had been sent. End quote. And Goodpasture added a second paragraph to the cable. This paragraph concerned a photograph that she had found in the production from one of the photo surveillance bases that covered the Soviet embassy. This paragraph said, quote, have photos, male appears to be American entering Sovem 12:16 hours, leaving 12:22 on 1st October. Apparent age 35, athletic build, circa 6 feet, receding hairline, balding top, wore khakis and sports shirt. Source, limited. End quote. Footnote, MEXI 6453, October 8, 1963, paragraph 2. The connection of this photograph to Oswald by including the description in the cable that reported Oswald's contact with the Soviet embassy has created more confusion and controversy than perhaps any other CIA-related issue stemming from assassination. Consequently, this committee has made an attempt to determine the circumstances surrounding the mistaken linkage of this photograph to Oswald, as well as the consequences of that mistake. The consequences of the mistake will be dealt with in more detail in subsequent sections. End footnote. The explanation for mistakenly linking this photograph to Oswald, advanced by the CIA officers in Mexico who had knowledge of the circumstances, is that this was the only photograph taken on October 1st, the day that the conversation occurred, that appeared to be of a non-Latin, and hence possibly an American. Quote, question. Do you know how that photograph was linked to the person mentioned? Answer. By date. It was taken entering the Soviet embassy and leaving on the same date this conversation took place. I remember that proceeding because we were combing through the takes for that day to determine any person who looked like an American male. I believe this was the only one. End quote. The testimony also corroborates that the photographs would have been checked for several days prior to the date of the conversation. Quote, question, you checked the photo surveillance materials for approximately a 4 or 5 day period. Is that correct? Answer, yes, I think it is. Question, during that 4 or 5 day period, this man was the only non-Latin appearing man whose photograph you found. Is that correct? Answer, I think it was the only non-Latin appearing person's photograph that we found that we could not identify as somebody else. A lot of the people who went to the Soviet embassy all the time, we came to know who they were. After they had been identified, they made frequent visits there." End quote. The review of the photo production from Limited, the one base that has been made available to this committee, makes the explanation of the mistake about the identity of the individual due to his being the only non-Latin implausible. The record reflects that unidentified American males were listed on the log sheet as UAM after the time was given. The photograph that was linked to Oswald was the only UAM that appeared on 2nd of October 1963. But on September 27, 1963, another UAM had appeared. The committee has concluded from a review of a note that Ann Goodpasture wrote on the log sheet that this individual had not been identified by the time that the October 8th cable was written. The note says, quote, "This is a Mexican named Gutierrez. License plate changed in February 64 to Mexican." End quote. This committee cannot be certain that other UAMs did not turn up on the production from the LI Lyric base because that production has not been made available for review. Ms. Goodpasture was asked about this and explained that the man, Gutierrez, was known in the station and that the base house agent was mistaken in identifying him as an American. This committee finds the above-quoted explanation hard to accept for other reasons. The October 1st transcript does not indicate that Oswald visited the embassy on that day. However, it does indicate a visit on the previous Saturday. Even if he did visit the embassy on the 1st of October, the photograph referred to him in the cable was not taken until the 2nd of October, 1963. The photographs from the one surveillance base for 1st, 2nd, and 3rd of October were on one roll of film and one log sheet was prepared by the base. The text of the log sheet is in black type. The separate day's coverage is set off by a row of red-typed percentage marks. Miss Goodpasture attempted to explain this mistake. Quote, "Question. Looking at the log, can you now explain to the committee why the cable referred to a photograph taken on October 1st when actually it was taken on another day?" Answer. If you look at the log here, you see at the top, it was just an oversight on the part of the person who was writing that cable. It looks as though the date is 1st of October, but if you read it very closely, you see there are only two frames that were shot on 1st of October and 2nd of October. It starts with frame number 3, etc., etc., and there the shots occur. This is the only explanation I can give. Question. Is your explanation that whomever referred to the log simply looked at the date at the top of the page, the date being October 1st, and did not see any reference to the date October 2nd? Answer, right. End quote. This committee finds it implausible that Ann Goodpasture, who had the specific duty of processing for operational leads all station photo surveillance info pertaining to the Soviet target since 1960 and had received a rating of outstanding on her annual fitness reports, would make such an oversight mistake and not discover it until 1976. This committee thinks that the fact that the mistaken date of the photograph was not discovered for so long is especially suspect in light of the fact that on the day after the assassination, CIA headquarters sent a cable to Mexico which said, quote, "FBI says that photos of man entering Soviet embassy, which MEXI sent to Dallas, were not of Oswald. Presume MEXI has double-checked dates of these photos and is also checking all pertinent other photos for possible shots of Oswald." End quote. Headquarters' presumption was evidently mistaken. No record exists that would indicate a reply to this cable by the Mexico City station. The likelihood that a photograph of Oswald was indeed obtained makes the explanation proffered by Goodpasture et al. Even more implausible. At this time, the committee cannot conclude why the original mistake was made, even though it does find the explanation offered by Goodpasture et al. To be highly implausible. Regardless of why the mistake was made, Oswald's contact with the Soviet embassy and the mistaken photographic identification of him were reported to headquarters. The October 8th cable was received at headquarters on 9th of October 1963. The cable, as was routine, went to the Mexico desk for action. The person who handled the case for the Mexico desk was Elsie Scaletti. Miss Scaletti initially considered the information routine. She took the routine steps of requesting a name trace. From the name trace, she learned that there was a 201 file on a Lee Henry Oswald, but that it was restricted to a branch of the agency known as CI/SIG. Footnote: a restricted file is a method of keeping abreast of any information that develops on the subject of the file. The file is marked to indicate that it cannot be reviewed without the permission of the person who made the restriction. The effect is that if anyone wants to see the file, the custodian of the file learns of that desire and the information leading to it. HSCA deposition of Anne E. G. Egerter, May 17, 1978, page 51. End footnote. The custodian of Oswald's file in October 1963 was Anne Elizabeth Goldsboro Egerter of the Counterintelligence Special Investigations Group. This group's purpose and interest in Oswald is detailed in another section of this final report dealing with whether or not Lee Oswald was an agent or asset of the Central Intelligence Agency. Miss Scaletti went to Miss Egerter and asked to see Lee Oswald's file, which was provided to her by Miss Egerter. Once the information from the Oswald 201 and the information in the cable from Mexico City was combined, the Oswald contact took on more significance. Quote, question: now, once the information had been obtained by you, did that in any way increase the significance of Oswald's contact with the Soviet embassy? Answer: as I recall, that is what I thought made it very significant. Question: can you explain why? Answer: any American who had tried to renounce his U.S. citizenship in the Soviet Union, now having again a relationship with the Soviet embassy, would lead one to wonder why he had tried to renounce his citizenship in the first place and why he was still in contact with the Soviets, whether there was a possibility he really was working for the Soviets or what. End quote. Miss Egerter remembers that the cable from Mexico City caused a lot of excitement. She was shown the October 9th cable. Quote, question: is this the cable that caused the excitement? Answer: yes, one of them. Question: why was excitement caused by this cable? Answer: contact with Kostikov. Question: what is the significance of the contact with Kostikov? Answer: I think we considered him a KGB man. Question: any other reason for the excitement? Answer: he had to be up to something bad to be so anxious to go to the Soviet Union. At least that is the way I felt. End quote. After reviewing Oswald's 201, which CI/SIG loaned to the Mexican desk where it remained until the time of the assassination, Miss Scaletti drafted a response to the Mexico City October 9th cable and also disseminated information about Oswald to other branches of the American intelligence community. These two documents were drafted at the same time and were sent within several hours of each other. Several aspects of these two documents are interesting and illustrate various points as well as raise serious questions. The cable which Miss Scaletti sent to Mexico says in full, quote, 1. Lee Harvey Oswald, who called Sovim 1st October, probably identical Lee Henry Oswald, 201-289248, born 18th of October 1939, New Orleans, Louisiana, former radar operator in United States Marines who defected to USSR in October 1959. Oswald is 5 feet 10 inches, 165 pounds, light brown wavy hair, blue eyes. 2. On 31st of October 1959, he attempted to renounce his United States citizenship to the United States Embassy in Moscow, indicating he had applied for Soviet citizenship. On 13th of February, the U.S. Embassy Moscow received an undated letter from Oswald postmarked Minsk on 5th of February 1961, in which subject indicated he desired return of his U.S. passport as wished to return to USA if we could come to some agreement concerning the dropping of any legal proceedings against me. On 8th of July, on his own initiative, he appeared at the embassy with his wife to see about his return to the States. Subject stated that he actually had never applied for Soviet citizenship and that his application at that time had been to remain in USSR and for temporary extension of his tourist visa pending outcome of his request. This application, according to Oswald, contained no reference to Soviet citizenship. Oswald stated that he had been employed since 13th of January 1960 in Belarusian radio and TV factory in Minsk, where worked as metal worker in research shop. Oswald was married on 30th of April 1961 to Marina Nikolaevna Pusakova, a dental technician born July 1941, USSR. No HDQS traces. He attempted arrange for wife to join him in Moscow so she could appear at embassy for visa interview. His American passport was returned to him. U.S. Embassy Moscow stated 20 months of realities of life in Soviet Union had clearly had maturing effect on Oswald. 3. Latest HDQS info was State Department report dated May 1962, saying State had determined Oswald is still U.S. citizen and both he and his Soviet wife have exit permits, and Department State had given approval for their travel with their infant child to USA. 4. Station should pass info referenced in paragraph 1 to U.S. Embassy, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Navy, and Immigration and Naturalization locally. Info paragraphs 2 and 3 originates with State. 5. Ref and possible identification being disseminated to HDQS of FBI, State, Navy, and I&NS. Please keep HDQS advised on any further contacts or positive identification of Oswald. End quote. Miss Scoletti wrote this cable. Miss Egerter was one of the people who reviewed the cable for accuracy. The cable was released by the Assistant Deputy Director of Plans, Thomas Karamessines. The teletype which Miss Scoletti wrote was sent to the Department of State, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and the Department of the Navy. This teletype says, quote, 1. On 1st October 1963, a reliable and sensitive source in Mexico reported that an American male, who identified himself as Lee Oswald, contacted the Soviet Embassy in Mexico City, inquiring whether the embassy had received any news concerning a telegram which had been sent to Washington. The American was described as approximately 35 years old, with an athletic build, about 6 feet tall, with a receding hairline. 2. It is believed that Oswald may be identical to Lee Henry Oswald, born on 18th of October 1939 in New Orleans, Louisiana, a former U.S. Marine who defected to the Soviet Union in October 1959 and later made arrangements through the United States Embassy in Moscow to return to the United States with his Russian wife, Marina Nikolaevna Pusakova, and their child. 3. The information in paragraph 1 is being disseminated to your representative in Mexico City. Any further information received is being made available to the Immigration and Naturalization Service. End quote. The first substantive conflict between these two documents are the dissimilar descriptions of Oswald. The response sent to Mexico gave a fairly accurate description of Oswald, while the dissemination to other government agencies gave the description that had mistakenly been connected to Oswald by the October 9th cable from Mexico City. Footnote: the mistaken identification of Oswald as Lee Henry is dealt with in another section of this final report. End footnote. Miss Egerter testified that she could not explain why the description discrepancies occurred. When Miss Scoletti was asked why this occurred, she first responded that there was a rule that prevented the agency from disseminating any information obtained from a third agency of the government. Hence, the accurate description of Oswald, which was from information furnished to the agency by the State Department, could not be included in the dissemination. It was pointed out to Miss Scoletti that the information in the second paragraph of the teletype was from the State Department sources, and that the Mexico City station had been instructed to disseminate the description locally, which she claimed could not be disseminated due to a third agency rule. She was asked the question again, and the following exchange occurred. Quote, Answer: let us start over again. The actual physical description on Lee Harvey Oswald from the October 10th cable was sent to the station to assist them in further investigation to see if they knew of anybody or had anybody down there that really fitted what we thought was an accurate physical description of the Oswald that we had a file on. When we came to the teletype to state, FBI, and Navy, we did not, and I would not normally, even today, provide those investigative agencies with the physical description of Lee Henry Oswald as we thought it to be then. We provided them only with our intelligence, not with State Department intelligence, which gave the stuff out about the audio and the possible physical description. The wording here in paragraph 1 on our teletype is worded that the American was described. As I told your man from your committee earlier, it possibly would have been better, although it did not occur to me at the time, and this is the way those things were written in those times, to say that an American described as this could possibly be identifiable and qualified, but the normal procedure in 1963 was to provide to the other government agencies information and intelligence from our sources. Question: were you aware when you sent out the cable and the teletype that you were giving different descriptions? Answer: yes, I assume I was. I don't remember now. This is some time. Question: was there any intention on your part to deceive any other agencies by giving a description contained in that paragraph in the teletype? Answer: none at all. End quote. Ms. Scoletti was interviewed by committee staff members on March 30th, 1978. She was questioned, as she indicates in the above quote, at that time about the description discrepancy. When Ms. Scoletti was shown the October 9th cable on that occasion, she stated that she would not have taken the description of the individual in paragraph 2 to be a description of Oswald. The description discrepancy was specifically pointed out to Ms. Bustos, and she was specifically questioned on that point. The report of that interview says, quote, "We next pointed out to Ms. Scoletti the fact that the response to Mexico had a correct description of Oswald, and the dissemination had an incorrect one. She said that the info in the first paragraph of the dissemination came from MEXI 6453, and that explained the incorrect description. We pointed out to her the fact that she had the correct description and that she had already told us that she did not associate the description in 6453 with Oswald, and that she had said that the cable and teletype had been prepared simultaneously by 3 knowledgeable people. She said, first, that the correct description would not have been put in the dissemination because it came from the file review. I pointed out that all of the information in the second paragraph of the dissemination was from the file review. She responded that they had not been sure that the Lee Oswald referred to in 6453 was the same as Lee Henry Oswald, on whom they had a file. Hence, they would not have included a description from 6453 that she did not think was connected to Oswald. She said that it had obviously been a mistake that doesn't matter now, but if she had it to do over again, she would not put any description in the dissemination because she was not sure that either applied to the man who identified himself as Lee Oswald at the embassy in Mexico." End quote. The second point of interest that is illustrated by the October 10th cable and teletype is the inference that can be made from reviewing paragraph 3 of the teletype, paragraph 5 of the cable, and Thomas Karamessine's signing off on the cable, that the CIA was asking for and promising a further investigation of Oswald without a specific request from any other government agency who might have had, as the 77 IGR says, investigative responsibility. The chief of the Soviet section in Mexico City recognized such a routine investigative responsibility as part of the normal course of his duties. Quote, "One of our responsibilities was to assist the FBI in identifying people who might become Soviet agents, particularly in America." End quote. As a matter of fact, the chief of the branch of the CIA responsible for the Mexican operations at headquarters thought this was one of the Mexico City station's strongest and most successful areas of endeavor. Quote, "They, Americans, were detected enough so that J. Edgar Hoover used to glow every time that he thought of the Mexico City station. This was one of our outstanding areas of cooperation with the FBI." End quote. The request for further investigation and dissemination contained in paragraph 5 of the October 10th cable to Mexico was the reason that the cable was sent to the Assistant Deputy Director of Plans for release. The chief of the Mexico branch was questioned extensively on this point. Quote, Answer: Well, it went up to Mr. Karamessines because it involved disseminating information on an American citizen to the U.S. government agencies, you see. At that time, probably still, the CIA did not investigate or pass around information on American citizens unless it were requested to by another government agency, either in that particular case or by some standard operating procedure. In other words, the CIA, seeing an American abroad, observing an American abroad, observing an American abroad engaging in some skullduggery, would inform the responsible U.S. agency here and sit and wait for instructions before doing anything further. In this case, we were passing on information to other U.S. government agencies in Mexico City, and this probably went to other places in Washington as well. Question: This particular information was disseminated to other agencies without a request of any such agency. Is that correct? Answer: Yes. Question: This fit into the other category of cases where disseminations were made? Answer: Disseminations would be made to other interested agencies, and any information we came across had action taken to follow up to take investigative steps. Dissemination would only be taken if another agency requested it, either specifically in that case or unless it were a part of standard operating procedure which would have been agreed upon with another agency. Question: Was any follow-up action contemplated by the October 10th cable? Answer: Yes. Please keep headquarters advised of any further contacts or for positive identification of Oswald. Question: That would be considered a follow-up. Answer: Yes. They were instructed to stay alert and report any further evidence of this man's presence. Therefore, Mr. Karamessines had to sign off on it. Question: Mr. Karamessines had to sign off on it because follow-up action was contemplated? Answer: With regard to a U.S. citizen abroad. Question: For purposes of clarification, I think you said that there were two situations where Mr. Karamessines would have to sign off. One would be where another agency requested the dissemination? Answer: Yes. No, not the question of the dissemination. It is a question of operational action being taken. Question: A request for operational action. What is the second example? Answer: Well. Question: Would the agency itself decide to take operational action? Answer: Ordinarily, operational action in an ordinary case would not require Mr. Karamessines' approval at all. It was only because an American citizen was involved. That interest in an American citizen might come about because of a specific statement of interest about this individual from another U.S. government agency, or it might come about because of a standard operating procedure. For example, we had an agreement with the FBI that we would follow up leads on any American citizen in Mexico City who appeared around the Soviet embassies, and so on, or anybody who was there appearing to defect, which we might learn through our telephone intercepts. We could just as well have sent this cable out without Mr. Karamessines releasing it. I do not know why we did it. Question: In fact, you pointed to something which I was going to ask you about. I was wondering why somebody as high up in the agency as Mr. Karamessines was the releasing officer. Answer: I would have been because of the U.S. citizen aspect, because so many other U.S. government agencies were involved, State Department, FBI, and the Navy. I suppose one of these things is the Navy. One of them could be the Immigration and Naturalization Service. Question: Let me attempt to summarize again. Karamessines would be responsible for signing off on this because operational action pertaining to an American was taken. Answer: Yes. Question: Either pursuant to the request of another government agency or pursuant to some standard operating procedure of the agency itself. Answer: Yes. Quote: Any other reason you can think of? Answer: No. Question: I believe you indicated that there was an arrangement or an agreement with the FBI that any activities by Americans around the Soviet or Cuban embassy would be reported and followed up on by the agency. Was that agreement in writing? Answer: I do not know. It probably was in writing somewhere. It antedated my tenure, and the agreement was not in the files. It would have been in the files of the DDP or of the CI staff." End quote. The chief of the Mexico branch hence believes that further investigation of Oswald was requested by CIA headquarters without the prior expression of interest from another government agency with investigative responsibility. This request for operational activity concerning an American abroad is advanced as the reason for the Assistant Deputy Director of Plans signing off on the cable. Even though the cable was brought to Karamessine's attention and he did sign off on it, Mr. Celso told this committee that that was not necessary due to a standing agreement with the FBI under which the CIA had agreed to investigate Americans in Mexico in contact with the Soviet embassy without any specific request from another agency. This recollection is corroborated by other testimony and documents. Elsie Scaletti also recalled that it would not have been necessary in 1963 to bring such a request for operational action to the ADDP's attention. She suggested that the reason for bringing it to the ADDP's attention did not have to do with the request for operational action, but because Oswald's contact was considered important enough to merit his attention. Quote, Question: Why would someone as high up in the organization as Karamessine's ask to be the releasing officer of this particular cable? Answer: I can only surmise now that I may have thought, or what several of us might have thought at the time, that since it involved somebody of this nature who had tried to renounce his citizenship, who was in the Soviet Union, married to a Soviet, got out with a Soviet wife, presumably, which is very strange, and now the contact with the Soviets, we could have a major security problem. This was one way of informing him and getting attention at the higher level. End quote. Even though the CIA denies such an agreement, if it was in writing, that covered the CIA's investigation of American citizens in Mexico, this committee is certain, on the basis of the above detailed evidence, that such an agreement existed, either formally or informally. Hence, the assertion in the 1977 IG report that Oswald was not an investigative responsibility of the CIA is seemingly inaccurate and misleading. This committee has attempted to determine what actions, if any, were taken by the CIA's Mexico City station after headquarters responded to the initial report of Oswald's contacts with the Soviet embassy. In this respect, two assertions of the 77 IGR are important. One, that it was not discovered that Oswald was seeking a visa to Russia and that he had also been in contact with the Cuban embassy until November 22, 1963, and two, that the station did nothing other than ask headquarters on 15th of October for a photograph of Oswald because no other government agency had made an official request for further information. It has already been shown that the official request that the agency claims was not forthcoming was, in fact, not necessary, and that as a matter of fairly routine operating procedure, the CIA headquarters requested a follow-up on the information already reported about Oswald. It has also been shown that the Oswald matter, after the name trace was done at headquarters, was considered to be fairly significant by the headquarters officials involved. In this regard, it should be pointed out that headquarters communicated its concern to Mexico by requesting in paragraph 5 of DIR 74830 more information on Oswald. It should also be noted that the CIA headquarters also, by notifying the interested government agencies that any further information received on this subject will be furnished to you, belied the necessity of one of the agencies making an official request for further action. Hence, the excuse offered for the claimed lack of action by the Mexico station is invalid, and the question becomes, 1, whether or not that station did any follow-up, 2, whether they did discover additional information about Oswald prior to the assassination, 3, whether that information, if any, was reported in an accurate and expeditious manner, and 4, if it was not reported, what was the reason for the failure to report? The Mexico City station received DIR 74830 on 11th of October 1963. The Mexico City copy of this cable is in Lee Harvey Oswald's Mexico City P file, along with the station routing slip. There are several interesting aspects to this copy of the cable, and there is evidence that provides indications of the station's actions and the timing of those actions. There are several marginal notations on this document. Perhaps the most interesting is the notation SIC, with an arrow drawn to the Henry in the name Lee Harvey Oswald. That notation was made by Win Scott when he read the cable on the day it was received in Mexico. This notation struck committee investigators as very strange because it was a possible indication that Win Scott knew, at the time the cable was received, that Lee Oswald's middle name was not Henry. David Phillips was questioned about that possibility. Quote, Question: Do you have any reason to believe that when this cable was received in October of 1963, Mr. Scott knew that cable's reference to Lee Harvey Oswald was incorrect? Answer: No, I don't recall that, but reading this, obviously at whatever time he wrote that SIC on there, he felt it was incorrect or he would not have spotlighted it that way. But I don't have any recollection. I don't have any recollection that we know before this cable came back down that it was Lee Harvey Oswald. End quote. The explanation most often advanced was that Mr. Scott often used the symbols SIC and AKA interchangeably, and that all he was indicating here was the Lee Oswald from the taps was also indexed and filed under the additional name Lee Henry Oswald. Mr. Phillips was also asked about this explanation. Quote, Question: Was he the kind of individual that would have interchanged or used interchangeably the letters AKA and SIC, SIC, interchangeably as having the same meaning? Do you appreciate that? Answer: Yes. I don't think so. He was an intellectual. His great secret was that he wrote poetry. He didn't want anyone else to know that. He was very well educated, extremely well read, and no, he is not the kind of man. Question: He would appreciate the distinction? Answer: He would appreciate the distinction between the two. End quote. If Mr. Scott did in fact make this notation prior to the assassination of John Kennedy, this committee has not been able to determine why SIC was used. Footnote: Scott's manuscript may provide a clue when he writes that during his first contact with the Soviet embassy, Oswald gave his name very slowly. Falfo manuscript, page 267. If Oswald used his middle name at that time, it would explain why Scott wrote SIC by Henry. But it should be noted that Oswald's name does not come up in any of the transcripts made available by the CIA until October 1st, 1963, and Oswald's middle name is not given in that transcript. It is possible that there is one additional transcript, possibly of the conversation that Scott, on page 267 of his manuscript, refers to as Oswald's first contact, which, if in existence, has not been made available to this committee. See Section 3A5 above. End footnote. The description of Oswald is marked on this cable with a double black line, a check mark, and the notation 24 years old in Ann Goodpasture's handwriting. At this point, at least, Miss Goodpasture and Alan White, the DCOS, realized that the photograph they had described in MEXI 6453 was not of Oswald. But this realization was evidently not shared by all the officers in the station. Miss Goodpasture remembers that there was some controversy in the station about whether the man described in the October 11th cable was the same man who had been picked up by the station's photographic surveillance. Miss Goodpasture remembers that she believed, based on the cable, that the photograph reported in MEXI 6453 was not of Oswald. She said that she argued over the identification with Win Scott, and that he said, "Oh, that may be incorrect," and so forth, but there was some quibbling over it. The routing slip on the October 11th cable indicates some of the dates when subsequent Mexico City station actions occurred. Miss Goodpasture noted that we should ask HQ for photo. No? Redacted noted that the dissemination requested by paragraph 4 of the cable was done on 15th of October 1963. Wynn Scott wrote, "Please set up P-file on Lee Henry Oswald and put all data we have into it. Photos?" The document was sent to the files on 15th of October 1963. Hence, we know that Oswald's Mexico P-file was opened on or about 15th of October 1963, and that Wynn Scott asked that all information be included in the file. There is substantial reason to believe that most, if not all, of the information available to the station was incorporated into the file at that time. The October 11th cable greatly increased the significance of Oswald's contact with the Soviet embassy in the eyes of the Mexico City station, just as the name trace results reported by that cable had made the matter more significant to the officers involved at headquarters. This cable aroused the station's operational interest in Oswald. Quote, question, to your knowledge, did the October 11th cable, in any way enhance the importance of Oswald's contact with the Soviet embassy? Answer, oh yes, sure it did. The fact that he had that kind of background. Sure, he became someone of considerable operational interest. Again, there was nothing other than operational interest. Question, in all likelihood, that cable would have prompted the people at the station to go back and look at the earlier transcripts? Answer, yes, I would think so. End quote. This committee believes that station personnel did, between October 11th and October 15th, go back and recheck the transcripts and connect the important substantive calls to Oswald. Under normal operating procedures, a tape of Oswald's calls to the Soviet embassy should not have been erased until 16th of October, 4 to 5 days after the case took on added significance. The one transcript of the call on October 1st, 1963, that had definitely been linked to Oswald prior to receipt of the October 11th cable bore a reference to an earlier conversation by a man who spoke broken Russian. The text of the October 1st call allowed that the prior call had probably occurred on September 28, 1963. It should have been possible at that point to compare the tapes to see if they were in fact the same caller. Indeed, a notation made by Ann Goodpasture on a newspaper article in 1964 suggests that this was the case. The note says, quote, the caller from the Cuban embassy was unidentified until HQ sent traces on Oswald and voices compared by Tarasov. End quote. The cable traffic after the assassination confuses this point rather than clarifies it. This will be dealt with in more detail in a subsequent section. An examination of documents in Lee Harvey Oswald's Mexico City Station P-file and the cable traffic from Mexico City to headquarters after the assassination raised a possibility that at least one tape of Oswald's voice existed as late as 16th of October, 1963. Footnote. The chief of the Mexico branch at headquarters has told this committee that it is his belief that the tapes were probably still in existence at the time of the assassination. HSCA deposition of John Celso, May 16, 1978, pages 76 and 77. But the testimony of the persons at the Mexico City station is consistent in saying that the tapes did not exist at the time of the assassination. See HSCA deposition of Robert Shaw, May 16, 78, page 29, HSCA deposition of Alan White, May 18, 78, pages 19 and 20, David A. Phillips' testimony, November 27, 76, page 63, David A. Phillips' testimony, April 25, 78, pages 17 and 23, and Goodpasture testimony, April 13, 1978, page 94. Addendum to footnote. Some controversy has arisen in regard to the question of whether the tapes existed at the time of the assassination, due to a memorandum from J. Edgar Hoover to the head of the Secret Service which said, quote, the Central Intelligence Agency advised that on October 1, 1963, an extremely sensitive source had reported that an individual identified himself as Lee Oswald, who contacted the Soviet embassy in Mexico City inquiring as to any messages. Special agents of this bureau, who have conversed with Oswald in Dallas, Texas, have observed photographs of the individual referred to above and have listened to a recording of his voice. These special agents are of the opinion that the above referred to individual was not Lee Harvey Oswald." End quote. Memorandum from Hoover to James J. Rowley, November 23, 1963, pages 4 and 5. The HSCA has determined that this statement was probably based on another FBI memorandum which said, quote, "Inasmuch as the Dallas agents who listened to the tape of the conversation allegedly of Oswald from the Cuban embassy to the Russian embassy in Mexico and examined the photographs of the visitor to the embassy in Mexico and were of the opinion that neither the tape nor the photograph pertained to Oswald, I requested Shanklin to immediately send a photograph of Oswald to our legal attaché." End quote. Memorandum from Belmont to Tolson, November 23, 1963, page 1. Mr. Belmont was reporting the results of a conversation with the special agent in charge in Dallas, Gordon Shanklin, that occurred at 11:50 a.m. Later that same day, SAC Shanklin informed the director that the tape of Oswald's voice had been erased. Quote, "It should be noted that the actual tape from which this transcript was made has been erased." End quote. Teletype from SAC Dallas to Director, number 232220, 7:30 p.m. Central Standard Time, November 23, 1963. Emphasis in the original. The confusion about whether or not there was a tape apparently continued for several days after the SAC in Dallas informed the director that such a tape did not exist. On November 25, 1963, the FBI legate in Mexico City sent a cablegram to the director which said, quote, "There appears to be some confusion in that no tapes were taken to Dallas, but only typewritten transcripts supplied by CIA. The tapes not being available because they had been erased." End quote. Cablegram number 182 and 183, page 2. The FBI was asked to explain the paragraph from the Hoover memorandum quoted above. It responded, quote, "The paragraph appearing on pages 4 and 5 of the letterhead memorandum, which is quoted in your FBI request of March 17, 1978, contains some incorrect information regarding a tape recording of the voice of an individual who identified himself as Lee Oswald. Retrievable information contained in files of the FBI indicates that this bureau received information derived from transcripts of tape recordings furnished by another government agency which conducts intelligence-type investigations. The transcripts indicated that on September 28, 1963, and October 1, 1963, the voice of an individual identifying himself as Lee Oswald was recorded by the other government agency conducting intelligence-type investigations. Additionally, this government agency provided the FBI with photographs of an individual who appeared to be an American, these photographs being taken by said agency on October 1, 1963. It is noted that the FBI never received the actual tape recordings from which the transcripts were derived, as the tapes were erased by the other government agency providing the transcripts. As a result, no FBI employee ever listened to a tape recording purporting to contain Lee Harvey Oswald's voice, as no tape was ever provided to this bureau. End quote. JFK Classified Document Number 131. No FBI agent interviewed by the committee recalled listening to any tape recording purporting to contain a conversation involving Oswald. End footnote. Assuming that the October 1, 1963 call in which an individual identifies himself as Lee Oswald was handled in an expeditious manner, the tape and the transcript would have been in the station by the following day at the latest. If the tape had been held for the normal 2-week retention period, it would have been erased on or about 16th of October. The tape from the September 28, 1963 conversation would have probably been in the station by the 1st or 2nd of October at the latest. Footnote: if the September 28, 63 conversation received expedited handling also, it is possible that it would have been in the station prior to the 1st or 2nd of October. End footnote. It would not have normally been erased until on or about 16th of October also. It seems clear that the tapes, under normal procedures, would have been retained until at least the middle of October. An examination of the documents does not clarify this question, but rather adds confusion to the issue. Several documents and cables deal with the tapes and a voice comparison of the recorded conversations. In Oswald's P file, there is a newspaper clipping of an article from the 21st of October 1964 Washington Post. The article, by Robert S. Allen and Paul Scott, is entitled CIA Withheld Vital Intelligence from Warren Commission. One paragraph from that article says, quote, "The investigators also are trying to determine why the CIA, in its pre-assassination report to the State Department on Oswald's trip to Mexico City, gave details only of the defector's visit to the Russian embassy and not the Cuban embassy. The CIA did not report the latter visit until after Kennedy's assassination in Dallas." End quote. Next to that paragraph, Ann Goodpasture wrote, quote, "The caller from the Cuban embassy was unidentified until HQ sent traces on Oswald and voices compared by Tarasoff." End quote. That statement is very clear in saying that a voice comparison was made. The cable traffic that went from Mexico to CIA headquarters after the assassination is not so clear. On 23rd of November, the CIA headquarters asked the Mexico City station to send the full transcripts of Oswald's conversations and original tapes, if available, to headquarters as soon as possible by a special courier. On that same day, Ann Goodpasture sent a cable to headquarters reporting the September 28, 1963 conversation. That cable said, in part, "Station unable compare voice as first tape erased prior receipt of second call." Later that same day, Miss Goodpasture wrote another cable which said, quote, "Tarasoff, who did transcriptions, says Oswald identical with person para one speaking broken Russian who called from Cuban embassy 28th of September to Soviet embassy." End quote. The next day, the Mexico City station informed headquarters that it had been unable to locate any tapes of Oswald's voice. Regret complete recheck shows tapes for this period already erased. The statement in MEXI 7023 that a voice comparison was not possible because of the first tape being erased prior to the second tape being received is inconsistent with the statements made in testimony and in other cables and with the procedure then in effect at the station at that time. It is therefore considered highly unlikely that a tape would be held only 1 or 2 days, the situation that is implied by the statement in MEXI 7023. The other statements by Miss Goodpasture in the cables and on the newspaper articles clearly indicate that a voice comparison was made. Miss Goodpasture was questioned about this. Quote, "Question, to your knowledge, was a voice comparison ever made between the tapes to determine whether the same person was speaking in each one?" Answer, I do not know. I did not make one. I do not know whether someone else made one or not. There is a transcript, a cable here, in which the transcriber of the Soviet tape says that it is the same voice, which would lead one to believe that he made a voice comparison, but it just may have been that he, from his memory, came to that conclusion. Question. On the lower right-hand corner of the newspaper article that is contained there, marked off with a dark line, is a paragraph. Kindly read that paragraph, starting with the words, "The investigators." Pause. Answer. This would suggest... Question. 1 moment. Answer. Tarasoff compared the voices on a tape of October. Question. Whose handwriting appears? Answer. That is mine. Question. That indicates that the caller. Could you please read that to us? Read what you wrote that day. Answer. The caller from the Cuban embassy was unidentified until headquarters sent traces on Oswald. Now that would have been in answer to the cable that was dated 8th of October. I believe their cable was 18th of October, and voices compared by Fineglass. Fineglass was the pseudonym used by Tarasoff. Question. In fact, that indicates... Answer. He compared the Cuban embassy voices with the others, with Oswald's call, in which he used his name. Question. When would that have happened? Answer. I said 18th of October because I thought that was the date of the cable. 10th of October, end quote. Boris Tarasov testified that he had not been queried at all about Oswald in 1963 and that he had not done a voice comparison. Redacted testified that Tarasov did not do a voice comparison, but connected the two conversations in his marginal comments in the transcripts on the basis of memory. Whether or not Mr. Tarasov or someone else did a voice comparison of the tapes, it is likely that the tapes did exist until at least the 16th of October and would have been available for such a comparison. It is possible that the connection between the October 1st, 1963 call and the September 28th, 1963 call was made on the basis of Mr. Tarasov's memory. In any event, the record clearly indicates that the tapes should have been available, and probably were available, as late as 16th of October 1963. This is significant because it was after receipt of the October 10th cable from headquarters that the Oswald case took on a more than routine coloring. The increased significance that the Oswald visit took on during the period from October 11th to October 16th, 1963, could have provided the station with reason to retain the Oswald tapes. Miss Goodpasture was asked what became of the Oswald tapes. Quote, question, what happened to that tape containing Oswald's voice? Answer, what happened? Question, what happened to that tape? Yes. Answer, I do not know. Question, do those tapes exist today? Answer, what? Question, do those tapes exist today? Answer, if they do, I do not know where they are. Question, are you aware of the fact that after the assassination, it has been alleged that some tapes were given to the FBI to listen to and that it was said that these tapes contained Oswald's voice on them? Answer, someone asked me about that, but I do not think that I had those tapes. I do not remember if I did, and I was not aware that we gave any to the FBI. I do not know whether Redacted got tapes from Mr. Tarasov and passed them to the FBI, or if the chief of station or deputy passed anything to the FBI. I just do not know." End quote. On the whole, most CIA officers who testified stated that if a tape of Oswald's voice existed at the time of the assassination, they did not know anything at all about it. One CIA officer, the chief of the branch responsible for Mexico, testified that he believed the tapes did exist at the time of the assassination. Quote, question, were they able to locate the original tapes? Answer, I think so. Question, do you recall what was done with those tapes? Answer, no. Question, did you ever? Answer, I never heard them. Answer, you never heard them? Answer, no. Question, on what basis do you say the original tapes were found? Answer, I had the impression that after the assassination, they did a lot of transcribing. I may be wrong. Question, let us look at MEXI 7025. Paragraph 4 there, which indicates that the person who did the transcript and says Oswald is identical with the person in an earlier paragraph who spoke broken Russian and called on 28th of September. That indicates that some sort of a voice comparison was made. Answer, yes, tapes were probably still in existence. End quote. The Tarasovs do not remember ever doing or being asked to do a voice comparison of the Oswald tapes, but the evidence, albeit circumstantial, seems to indicate that the tapes were in existence and that the voices were compared by someone. Redacted suggested that Tarasov may have confirmed the fact that the two calls were made by the same person by memory after receipt of the October 11th cable. However, the station made the connections, whether by voice comparison and or by comparison of the substantive information in the October 11th cable to the substantive information in the transcripts. The conversations were linked to Oswald prior to the assassination and probably by the time that the P file was opened on or about 16th of October 1963. Miss Goodpasture was also asked about this. Quote, question, on October 1st, you found out that Oswald had been at the Russian embassy the preceding Saturday. Was any effort made to check your materials from the surveillance operation? the photographic surveillance operation, or from the telephonic surveillance operation to get additional information on this? Answer: I do not know whether I checked it immediately or not at this stage. I do know that they were checked thoroughly after the assassination. In fact, I think they were checked thoroughly after the information came back from Washington identifying a Lee Oswald. End quote. On October 15, 1963, a P file was opened on Oswald. That same day, the CIA Mexico City station requested that headquarters send them a photograph of Oswald. On that date also, Redacted drafted a local dissemination memo regarding Oswald's contact with the Soviet embassy. By this date, at least the October 1st 1045 call, the September 28th 1151 call, the September 27th 405 call, and the September 27th 426 call had been linked to Oswald. On 16th of October 1963, the memorandum drafted by Redacted was circulated at the U.S. Embassy. It said, quote, 1. The following information was received from a usually reliable and extremely sensitive source. On 1st of October 1963, an American male contacted the Soviet embassy and identified himself as Lee Oswald. This officer determined that Oswald had been at the Soviet embassy on 28th of September 1963 and had talked with Valery Vladimirovich Kostakov, a member of the consular section, in order to learn if the Soviet embassy had received a reply from Washington concerning his request. We have no clarifying information with regard to this request. 2. Our headquarters has informed us that the Oswald above is probably identical with Lee Henry Oswald, born on 18th of October 1939 in New Orleans, Louisiana, a former radar operator in the U.S. Marine Corps who defected to the Soviet Union in October 1959. 3. This office will advise you if additional information on this matter is received. End quote. When Redacted was asked why she had stated that it was determined that Oswald had been in contact with the Soviet embassy on 28th of September, she said that it must have been because she had rechecked the transcripts by this time, as otherwise she would not have used such certain language. When asked why the October 16th memo said that there was no clarifying information on Oswald's request when it was known by this time that he was seeking a visa, Redacted said that they had no need to know all those other details. There are no indications that any other actions were taken by the Mexico City station prior to the assassination. Footnote: there are some cryptic references to the CIA station trying to determine Oswald's whereabouts after receiving the October 11th cable. See testimony of Ann Goodpasture, April 13th, 78, pages 112 and 113. The procedures used in this attempt and the actions that may have been taken have not been determined. If any records of these efforts exist, they have not been made available to this committee. End footnote. Even though the station's actions after the October 11th cable were not highly extensive, it is inaccurate and misleading to say that those actions were limited to requesting a photograph of Oswald from headquarters. Other actions included rechecking the transcripts and discovering the substantive ones that concerned Oswald and reporting the information in MEXI 6453 and DIR 74830 to various components in the U.S. Embassy in Mexico City in a misleading manner. Hence, the fact that Oswald was seeking a visa and had been in contact with the Cubans as well as the Russians was known prior to the assassination, and the station's actions prior to the assassination were more comprehensive than merely requesting a photograph, although if any action other than a file check was taken, no record of that action has been made available to this committee. It is unlikely, but possible, that this information that was developed by the Mexico City station after October 11, 1963, was reported to headquarters. Elsie Scaletti pointed out that a report of this additional information on Oswald's activities in Mexico would have been expected. Ms. Scaletti's belief that the information should have been reported to headquarters is shared for identical reasons by her superior at headquarters. The testimony from the people involved, both at headquarters and in Mexico, while often uncertain, is generally that they do not remember that such a cable was sent. Ms. Scaletti said that she could not recall that Mexico had sent any other information to headquarters prior to the assassination, but added, "I could not swear to that." The head of the Mexico branch at headquarters was certain that this information was reported, but he could not recall the form of the report or whether it occurred before or after the assassination. Robert Shaw first testified that, to his knowledge, the information was not reported prior to the assassination, and then added, "But I would have no way of knowing." The deputy chief of station in Mexico, Mr. Allen White, was also unsure on this point. Quote, Question: Did they ever indicate to headquarters that Oswald had been to the Cuban embassy as well as to the Soviet embassy and that he wanted a visa? Answer: I would have to assume that they did. I realize that assume is a bad word. Question: You don't have personal knowledge one way or another? Answer: No, prior to the assassination I would not. End quote. Ann Goodpasture was also unsure of her recollection in this area. Quote, Question: But headquarters was never appraised of that voice comparison? Answer: I think they were in a cable. Answer: I think they were in a cable. Question: Prior to the assassination? Answer: No, I do not think they were prior to the assassination. Question: It is determined that the same person was talking on each tape, and there is no follow-up to headquarters, even though headquarters clearly considered this to be significant? Answer: The follow-up was made by disseminating this information from the traces locally and trying to identify Oswald, trying to locate the man. That is the way the follow-up was made. We thought that he may still be in Mexico. Question: The point is, however, that upon the making of a voice comparison, if in fact that was done, that information was not communicated to anyone. Answer: I do not know if it was or not. You would have to check the file completely, the cable traffic, to see if it was. To the best of my knowledge, it was not until after the assassination. Question: In fact, headquarters did not know that he had also been to the Cuban embassy. Answer: At that point, no. Question: At least, according to your recollection, it was not until after the assassination that headquarters was informed of that fact. Answer: That is probably right. End quote. Only one person who was interviewed by this committee was certain of her recollection. Redacted was certain that a second cable reporting Oswald's contacts with the Cuban embassy had been sent to headquarters prior to the assassination. Quote, Question: It does not strike you as more significant that the American contacts the Soviet embassy and he also contacts the Cuban embassy? To me, that would make him seem more significant, and therefore, if you found out about this after the time the first cable was sent, you would have sent another cable. Answer: I did not send another cable, but I know another cable was sent. I didn't send it. Question: Another cable concerning Oswald was sent. Answer: I think so. Where's the whole file? Wasn't there a cable saying he was in touch with the Cuban embassy? Question: We have not seen one. Answer: I am pretty sure there was. Question: Did you send that cable? Answer: No, I did not send the cable. When I found out about it, I remember this. I said, how come? Question: Who did? Do you know? Answer: I don't know who sent it. I think Ann Goodpasture might have. She might have sent a follow-up one with this information. End quote. The staff of this committee suggested that Mr. Phillips' clear recollection of involvement in reporting Oswald's visit to the Cuban embassy and that he was seeking a visa, along with the fact that Mr. Phillips was not in Mexico at the time that the first cable was sent, could possibly be an indication that he is recalling a second cable. When asked about this, Mr. Phillips stated that he had no knowledge of a second cable sent prior to the assassination. Quote, Some corroboration of redacted assertions were found in the materials from Win Scott's safe. On page 777 of the Warren Report, the erroneous statement was made that it was not known that Oswald had visited the Cuban embassy until after the assassination. Every piece of information concerning Lee Harvey Oswald was reported immediately after it was received to U.S. Ambassador Thomas C. Mann by memorandum, the FBI chief in Mexico by memorandum, and to my headquarters by cable, and included in each and every one of these reports was the conversation Oswald had, so far as it was known. These reports were made on all his contacts with both the Cuban consulate and with the Soviets." End quote. If the cable was sent, it is not in the files made available to the HSCA by the CIA. The head of the Mexico branch admitted that the information should have been reported and that if it had been, the Oswald case would have been handled differently, at least as far as the dissemination of information about him was concerned. Quote, question. Had the information concerning Oswald's visit to the Cuban embassy, in addition to the Soviet one, that Oswald had been requesting a visa, if it had been sent to CIA headquarters, would his case prior to the assassination have been handled in any different manner? Answer. It would have been in the case of dissemination of information about him, but I do not think any operational action would have taken to apprehend him or to contact him or to try to force him back to the United States. Question. How would the dissemination have been treated differently? Answer. Well, it simply means that we would have disseminated any additional information that we got. End quote. It cannot be determined with exactitude whether or not this additional information about Oswald was reported to headquarters. In all likelihood, it was not. The chief of the Mexico desk was asked whether or not the station was ever criticized for this failure to report in the face of a specific request to do so by CIA headquarters. He said, quote, "No, that was not because we were trying to go easy on them. It is simply because it is in the nature of the business. What you are trying to do is engage, as I used to say, in important illegal manipulations of society, secretly. We were running, at that time, a vast action program in Mexico City to try," redacted. I do not know whether you informed yourself about the magnitude of our political action program at the time. Absolutely enormous. We were trying to follow the Soviets and all the satellites and the Cubans. At the same time, the main thrust of the station's effort was to attempt to recruit Russians, Cubans, and satellite people. End quote. Perhaps the nature of the CIA Mexico City station's handling of the Oswald case prior to the assassination can best be summed up in Dave Phillips' response when he was asked how he would characterize that handling. Quote, "At the very best, it is not professional. At the best." End quote.